Chris Williams, who is the director of the New York office of UN Habitat, based in New York, and he has been with headquarters in Nairobi for many years, also spearheading the slum upgrading program, UN Habitat, and a number of other financing programs. So here's a message from Chris Williams, a video message.
Distinguished mayors, investors, policymakers, professionals, and researchers. It is an honor and pleasure to join you today for the 4th Urban Economic Forum, and as it so happens, on the occasion of World Habitat Day 2022. In this brief address, I would like to touch on 4 aspects of urban economics. The first concerns financing. The second is a question of localization. The third is on housing, and then a little bit on crisis, urban crisis and conflict. I'd like to conclude with some brief statements about some of the global advocacy that UN Habitat and others committed to this issue are advancing and moving forward on. As regards the financing of cities, I think we can all agree, as probably many of the mayors on this call have experienced, the impact of COVID was quite significant. UN Habitat put together a publication known as Cities and Pandemics, and we came up with the concept of the scissor effect. COVID basically increased expenditures, but then reduced revenues, leaving cities in a very difficult situation. It's quite important in terms of financing to correct this measure by looking squarely at endogenous resources, looking at the revenue streams that cities have available to them. In many countries that are very low income, they are able to actually derive endogenous resources through tax bases for the purposes of land registration and evaluating assets. This is an important area of work that UN Habitat is supporting in places like Afghanistan and Somalia. Regarding localization, while many of the mayors and those attending this conference are struggling to meet their expenditures with less revenues, they are actually among the lucky ones. Most mayors and governors around the world lack the fiscal autonomy that's enjoyed in global north. They cannot raise revenues, and they rely almost entirely on fiscal transfers from central governments, and of course the associated politics with dealing with central government. A major focus in the future of ensuring that financing is available for urban development is devolution and decentralization. These are necessary as a first step to financing the cities we want. I'm happy to report that the African Union has taken up this issue through its working group on urbanization and decentralization and basic service delivery at subnational level, and are looking squarely at how to bring decentralization more squarely in multiple countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Housing, major issue for all of us, affordable housing and the need to end homelessness. This is something that we need to grapple with in all parts of the world. In the global north, most North America and Europe, cities have essentially been people have been priced out of cities. They've become much too expensive. So mayors need to take back the cities. They need to honor our human rights obligations, and they really need to engage more deliberately with investors and developers so that investors and developers are part of the solution. They're not dividing cities, but unifying them. This will also require strong engagement from neighborhoods and their organizations. Working on multiple stakeholder engagement, of course, is something that many of you are doing in your daily work, and it's something that the UN is pushing quite strongly, not just at country level, but globally. Regarding crisis and recovery, cities basically are not only dealing with the issues that we've discussed in health emergencies, but also they're dealing with the effects of climate, unexpected costs associated with that, and in some cases, human conflicts and natural disasters of proportions that we've not seen before. So how best do we finance cities, and how do we help them deal with the crisis in terms of their ability to recover not only from the immediate crisis, but longer term difficulties? The urban recovery frameworks is a methodology that UN Habitat is deploying with OECD and the World Bank, as well as the EU, to ensure that at the municipal level, cities around the world are able to respond to crisis and conflicts and can aggregate their contributions so that there's a more effective national recovery framework. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, by saying that UN Habitat is working quite actively to promote urban economies and financing through global advocacy. The United Nations convened in April 2022 the high-level meeting of the General Assembly on the Implementation of the Urban Agenda, in which over 100 countries participated, really bringing up the issue of urban development in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. In September, the UN Habitat was invited to the G7 ministers meeting of housing and urban development at Potsdam for the first time ever that housing ministers and urban development ministers were brought to the G7 discussion. Also coming up in November is the COP27, in which there will be a dedicated session convened by the president of COP to ensure that there's an opportunity for housing and urban development and the ministers representing those issues to weigh in on both nationally determined commitments as well as adaptation plans. And lastly, the Habitat Assembly, please mark your calendars for June 2023. 5 to 9 June 2023 will be having its second session every 4 years. World convenes to address global urban policy issues, and we welcome everyone's participation. Thank you very much.
That was a message from Chris Williams, the director of New York office. One of the main points he raised was the need for fiscal autonomy that cities and municipalities and towns need to have, and not the least when you try to finance issues such as climate change, clean energy, not least clean energy finance. So in that context, I have the pleasure of inviting Vincent Gasparo, who is the managing director of Corporate Development and Clean Energy Finance, Land City Community Investment Bank. Vincent, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you at the Urban Economy Forum in my beautiful hometown of Toronto, Canada. For those of you here visiting from outside of this beautiful city, there's a lot to take in and enjoy from our professional sports teams, restaurants, nightlife, to many cultural attractions. As the world's most diverse city, I encourage you to take in as much of it as possible, and of course spend as much money as possible, because we need you to keep our economy growing. Thank you for being here. So, I was told to make this an uplifting speech, but I think in hard context of what I'm about to say, I think we need to set the tone and be realists for a moment. And we've all heard the famous quote, "May you live in interesting times." And as we gather here today, we are definitely meeting in very interesting times. On the one hand, as we all know, we've been hit by several crises over a short period of time. A plague, COVID, which, as we all know, killed millions of people around the world, devastating families, disrupting major economies around the world, and disrupting labor markets. We then collectively addressed those disruptions, rightly, at least initially, with a massive amount of fiscal and monetary stimulus, which in part has set the stage for now an irrational actor to enter stage right that has led to the first war on the European continent in 80 years, and has in turn created an energy shock that is spread around the globe, which has caused inflation and interest rates to be at 40-year highs. On the other hand, these crises have led to greater collective action than anyone thought possible. Between coordinated action by the G7 and NATO, to the coming together at COP26, where I was honored to be a part of Canada's official delegation, that saw the establishment of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which included the 400 largest financial institutions who have a collective balance sheet of $130 trillion, agreeing to a goal of net zero portfolio emissions by 2050, as well as establishing interim CO2 reductions. This was and is significant. Now, I know there have been some issues with that initiative over the last several days, but the commitment of capital to financing our green transition is real and is here to stay. The fact is, if we are going to combat large global challenges, not one sector of society has the ability to do it on its own. Bay Street, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, governments at all levels, not-for-profits, and academia, we all have to work together. in order for us to have a chance at being successful. Financial institutions like Van City have a unique role, as we have the capital and financial expertise to deliver exceptional results quickly. We have seen this in the marketplace, specifically partnering with levels of government like local governments. Some transactions that we've worked on that have specifically addressed climate change and helped our local municipal partners. One perfect example was the City of Ottawa. We financed a $33.9 million financing partnership with the City of Ottawa on their Better Homes loan program. It offered homeowners a 20-year loan ranging from $15,000 to $125,000. Homeowners repay the loan via a local improvement charge that is attached to their property tax bill. This linking the loan to long-term assets like real estate and property generally encourages owners to move forward with long-term retrofits without the worry that they will be unable to recoup the expenses and realize a rate of return in the event they wish to sell. If they do sell, the new homeowners will assume the balance of the loan while also benefiting from reduced energy expenses for the tenure of their ownership, therefore saving the owner significant money and also saving the planet a great deal of carbon emissions. Another example of a partnership with multiple levels of government is a recent transaction where we financed the largest wastewater to energy project in the world right here in Toronto. This project was leveraging public sector assets, so the wastewater that comes off of our sewer system, using, in essence, geothermal technology, with Toronto Western Hospital as the off-taker. This transaction will pay the City of Toronto a long-term leasing fee for access to the wastewater. Will also reduce the GHG emissions at Toronto Western Hospital by 250,000 tons. Save the hospital $1 million a year, per year for 30 years. And just for everyone's, metric setting, 250,000 tons of GHG emissions is the equivalent of taking 1,811 cars off the road every year, per year, for 30 years. When you talk about Build Back Better, this is exactly what we're talking about. We have a hospital now, which is here in Toronto, Canada, is basically in essence, a crown corporation of the province, partnering with the city for access to wastewater, and the federal government through the Canada Infrastructure Bank provided some financing as well. So you had all three levels of government here in Toronto, Canada, working with a financial institution to finance these sorts of transactions. And the third transaction I want to highlight is also in relation to our First Peoples. In both Canada and the United States, we have a lot more work to do when it comes to reconciliation, but there is a significant partnership we can have when it comes to fighting climate change. Another transaction we financed was with the Six Nations of the Grand River, Canada's largest Indigenous community. And this was a partnership where we financed their equity in Ontario's second largest wind farm, 230 megawatt wind farm. This refinancing of their equity allows them to, on a net present value basis, put about $13 million back into the Six Nations community for social development purposes. So I highlight those three transactions because it's partnerships with financial institutions who have the financial expertise and the ability to move capital and move quickly, and partnering with governments and other community groups in order to move the needle on a lot of our ESG targets. And the fact is, financial institutions, both community and global financial institutions, have a significant role to play as we fight climate change. But in partnership with other levels of government, we can accelerate this transition to a net zero economy while giving our children the same, if not better, quality of life that we currently enjoy. Thank you very much.
you, Vincent. That was indeed very inspiring examples of how financial institutions can work closely with city governments for the benefit of the community. And the Van City Community Investment Bank examples of wastewater management, energy conversion, in fighting climate change and clean energy are indeed replicable and scalable. So I do hope that we can collaborate with the World Urban Pavilion in presenting your cases so that others can learn from what the examples are. So they are indeed quite worthy of noting, not only in Canada, also on a global scale. Thank you very much indeed. Now we have Mayor Elizabeth Patsoye Tabia Sake, who is the mayor of Accra, Ghana. It's about 3 p.m. in Ghana, I think. So I hope we are able to get her wise words now as a keynote speaker. Here you are, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon to viewers and all panel members. I bring you greetings from the sunny city of Accra. I am happy to join you and share my thoughts on sustainable urban finance, not just as a mayor of the city of Accra, but also as the first female mayor after 124 years. And that is why I'm working round the clock to create resilient and sustainable city. Over time, cities have become home to a large segment of the global population and have also served as center of economic growth and innovation. Incidentally, they have become vulnerable to all manners of disasters, both natural and human caused, largely as a result of a high concentration of people and activities. As the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has unfolded across the world with consequences on all aspects of the global economy and society, urban centers have become hotspots for transmission of the virus, which also presents a challenging environment for effectively responding to the pandemic. Cities are on the front line of the world's most pressing challenges: climate change, migration, urbanization, and equitable economic development, and Accra is no exception. Fueled by population growth and the rural to urban migration, urbanization in global South cities is rapidly increasing, generating a massive need for investment in urban infrastructure. More than half of the residents in our cities live in informal housing, and this comes with developmental needs of the city to meet the growth of this population. The city of Accra, like many other cities in the global South, faces a huge challenge in providing infrastructure and basic services for our cities while accommodating our growing urban population. The challenges cities face has had a significant impact on urban economic, and the solutions lie in global exchanges like this forum, where ideas are shared and solutions discussed. As the city mobilizes to address its numerous challenges, we do so with the commitment to meeting the SDGs. The city of Accra is working daily to ensure that the goals are met, and each year we get closer to heeding the urgent call to end poverty, reduce inequality, improve health and education, as well as power economic growth. Most of these challenges also come with financial inadequacy, which is a critical factor to addressing those challenges and assist with the rapid urban development. Ghana's capital city, Accra, is the largest population center and the country's economic hub. We have a population of 2 million people with a daily influx of 2 million more coming into the city to transact businesses or for visits, among others. Accra Metropolitan Assembly has developed a climate action plan which builds on national climate policies and aligns with Ghana's sustainable development goals. The plan identifies a range of actions that, once implemented, will achieve significant greenhouse gas emission reduction, improve quality of life, create green jobs, and set the city on a path towards climate resilience and carbon neutrality by 2050. Accra aims to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 27% by 2030, to further reduce emission by 46%. In achieving this reduction in emission requires concerted and ambitious plan in all sectors. I mentioned climate action because it is urgent, and the city is very particular about unlocking finance to carry out the action in the plan, especially this series of priority action to be implemented between 2020 and 2025, which will set the city on a pathway towards resilient and sustainable development in 2050. To be able to implement the action the plan sets out, financial commitments are a must. Considering the climate action plan and the many needs of our residents, which are a priority to the city, bearing in mind the inadequacy of funds, there's the need to enhance the foundations of our municipal finance. To enable the city to finance its projects and resources, we have taken some action to unlock investment for infrastructure to enable us to meet some financing goals. The Assembly has access to statutory funding sources, including the internal generated funds, Government of Ghana, and external donor finance, with occasionally private partnership for specific projects such as the greening projects, provision of libraries, renovation of schools, hospitals, among others. However, the lack of sufficient internal generated funds and limited access to global finance for subnational projects is currently a key barrier. The city of Accra has incorporated into the medium-term development plan from the sub-metro level. This is enforced as a requirement at the national level. Budgetary allocations are also made through the Assembly's composite budget process. This is the most predictable funding, as it is generated internally by the Accra Metropolitan Assembly City of Accra, permitting fees allocated to units and departments through the medium-term budget cycle. However, the total funding is very low and is mainly restricted to staff salaries. Projects are financed by the national government through the annual budget and multi-year project planning process. This includes the District Assembly Common Fund, a development fund created under Article 252 of the 1992 Constitution. The District Assembly Common Fund is capitalized with at least 5% of the national revenue set aside for all district assemblies using a sharing formula approved by Parliament. The city applies for global finance mainly to implement priority climate action plan with approval from the government of Ghana. So far, the city has been able to unlock funding through the C40 Cities Climate Financing Facility, the Accra-Paris Agreement Funding, the Global City Funds for Migrants. Local private sector actors are key partners for development. Several of those actions would benefit from de-risking investments for the local private sector, transparency on return on investment, for instance, of solar or energy efficiency investment might encourage banks to lend for such investment. Other actions required more direct private sector engagement, such as waste sector contracts for service delivery and greening projects. We are looking to unlock more of such private sector fundings. The digitalization of revenue collection. I have commissioned a digitalization project that will ensure that most of the city revenue is digitalized, removing all barrier of manual collection of funds. This will ensure efficiency, transparency, and also increase revenue cash flow. The city will work with key stakeholders, especially city residents, to get their buy-in and support to see this as a win-win for both them and city authorities. It's only when they get this that we will succeed. It's only when they get this that we will succeed. The city will employ proper monitoring and accountability of those processes and put in institutional reform and controls if this must work. If we get this right, we believe there will be an increase in our revenue. The good thing is we have the support of the country's vice president, who is leading the digitalization agenda of the country and is deploying all tools and technical assistance to help the city get it right. Urban planning is crucial to prepare for the orderly expansion of our cities, to guide investment, optimize the use of our lands, and allow us to create the resilient and sustainable city we envision. In the area of green buildings, alternative transportation routes such as trams, bicycle lanes, among others. This requires more national collaboration, and we are working with the national government on this. When the urban planning is right, investment will be forthcoming. I also believe that the future points towards green bonds as an option to consider in the near future. The Assembly does not have the regulatory and financial environment to issue a green bond. Green bonds have become quite popular and are alternative financing and refinancing options for climate projects. If the Assembly has the legal power to issue green bonds, It can draw attention to the city's climate priorities and climate mitigation strategy and make the city more attractive to investors. Together with the Assembly's leadership, we will lead the discussion with relevant stakeholders and decision makers to consider the issuance of green bonds and empower the municipal assemblies to bring in investors for these bonds. We do not just need the legal framework for green bonds, but we need that to assess external funding at all levels and the time for such discussion to accelerate this now. Another important means of attracting external funding for larger capital expenditure are PPP, that's the public-private partnership, which the city is scaling up on. In the past, the city has benefited from this partnership, and it is time to pinch our ambitious projects. The new modern markets, alternative transportations in the city, among others, for this partnership. While the city can enter into these partnerships, it requires collaborations from the national government, and so far, they have been accommodating. A lot more work needs to be done to unlock funding, and we are ready to explore new models of cooperation and coordination across the multiple assemblies for action to strengthen municipal finances. I will be bringing these long interventions to an end soon.
Thank you.
So,
thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Worship Mayor Tawaya Sake, for explaining eloquently and lucidly the limited access to global finance that cities in the developing countries have and the financial inadequacy. I also congratulate you on becoming the first woman mayor of Accra after 125 years of its existence as a municipality. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I then, this actually leads seamlessly into the next presenter, Mr. Lars Andersson. He is the chairman of Morten Andersen Productions. He is a global expert on municipal finance in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and not the least in Europe. May I then request Lars to take the floor, please? Welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very good. Good morning from a very nice afternoon in the Swedish countryside. It would have, of course, been very nice to be in Toronto, but since that's not possible, I'm really happy to be able to participate in this way. I'm a member of the supervisory board and the chairman of the strategy committee of Agence France Locale, which is the French municipal bank, and senior advisor to FMDV, Fonds Mondial pour le Développement de Villes, or International Fund for Cities Development. And also independent advisor in question concerning local finance, mainly in Europe and Africa. I started my working life very long ago in a Swedish local authority. More and more over the 10 years that I worked as finance director, I could see that the commercial banks all offered loans with interest rate that had no reasonable relation to the risk of a local authority. There were no sign of real competition. The offered interest rates were at the same high level, independent on which bank that made the offer. So I came up with a suggestion that the local authority in Sweden should form their own municipal bank, or as we say, a local government funding agency, Lgfa, and pool their financing needs. To make a long story very short, Communinvest, which was the name of this agency, saw the light of day in 1986. And I was the first CEO of this agency, and I was the CEO for 15 years. But when we started Communinvest, I became aware that the idea wasn't that unique. In Denmark, the Lgfa had been around since 1898, and later in the 20th century, the Netherlands and Norway followed. Fairly recently, France got their agency in 2013 and the UK in 2014. And I was advisor in both these processes. In Canada, you have one agency that is owned by local authorities, and that is the Municipal Finance Authority of British Columbia, that was created in 1970. So what is a local government funding agency? It's simply an entity that borrows in the domestic and international bond markets and on-lend the proceeds to the local authorities. The Lgfa bonds is in most cases done with the guarantees from local authorities, but these guarantees could look a bit different from country to country. The advantages of an Lgfa is that it gives access to the capital market for small and medium-sized local authorities. It reduces the cost of borrowing, which includes reduced processing costs as well. It reduces the risk through diversification, even for big cities. And it also reduces the risk because of the fact that an agency can employ financial expertise to handle the operations. It gives incentive to improve creditworthiness, since all those in a corporation like this has to be supervised, and they will be supervised by the other members, by its peers, which is a very, very efficient way of supervising local authorities. The Swedish agency has a special form of governance in 2 levels. Local politicians sets the overall strategy, and professionals oversee of the financial operations. The governance model separates political questions from professional, and the French agency has a similar model. To set apart the political questions from the professional is something that I suggest to countries that consider creating Lgfas. It's efficient and it prevents corruption. Just for you to get a feeling of the operations of Communinvest, today, close to 100% of all Swedish municipalities are members, and the lending portfolio amounts to the equivalent of over 45 billion euros. We don't have the time to go deeper into the business model of a Lgfa, but let's look at why financial cooperation could be an important tool also in developing countries. As we all know, we face many challenges: climate change, urbanization that leads to infrastructure gaps, growing inequalities, changed demographics and migration, which could lead to brain drain in some countries. And now we're faced with the inflation and a possible recession. It's evident that many of these challenges will end up as responsibilities for cities. And for cities, there are even more challenges: lack of decentralization. In many countries, it's claimed that decentralization is on its way, but we've seen very little of that so far. The second one is insufficient financial resources. This counts for also own source revenues, but also insufficient transfers from central government. And all this can lead to a poor quality of public services that can result in lack of local support and engagement. My latest book has the title No More Lonely Heroes, and my firm belief is that cooperation is the only way forward. This goes for many areas, and especially the financial field. I believe that local government funding agencies could have an important role to play also in developing country, but it must be formed according to the specific circumstances in each country. I've been a part of projects supported by, among others, the World Bank Group, with the aim of establishing financial corporations in countries like South Africa, Senegal, Romania, and Bulgaria. It's not an easy task. Why? Since I say it's such a good idea. Well, firstly, existing low credit worthiness creates challenges. But remember that I claim that cooperation gives incentive to raise the credit worthiness. The second obstacle is distrust from national authorities and the fact that local authorities are often not used to cooperate with each other. But let's look at the broader picture. I've been to many conferences where the question of local finance in developing countries has been the topic. Still, progress is not easy to see. So why are we not succeeding? Let me pick 3 reasons. The first is lack of trust in local authorities in most countries, which lead to a centralized approach to the solving of local challenges. The second is, I think that we do have too much focus on so-called bankable projects. Most of the basic local infrastructure investments in cities are not really bankable. It is a question of schools, home for the elderly, etc. And finally, and thirdly, and probably most important, I think that the actions taken lacks the long-term view. We're too short-sighted. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Lars, for indeed providing example of the local government funding agency as a model possibly for developing countries too. And it's so important that you pointed out the limitations that the country governments do not have enough of trust in local authorities. And we are questioning the whole rationale of what is a bankable project in it. If it is benefit for people, it is to be bankable. So we need to reconsider the whole idea of what bankable projects are. And then also the question of long-term vision, which is necessary as well. I'm glad that you raise these issues, that we will continue in our discussions for the rest of the day, and also try to see how we can have this example presented in other contexts as well. Now we have also virtually Deborah DeLong, who is Associate Professor of Global Management Studies, Ted Rogers School of Management at the TMU. Here you are.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers for having me speak today. I'm going to share my screen and present a PowerPoint presentation. I hope everyone can see it right now.
Yes, we see it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so in line with the theme of UEF4, Sustainable Urban Finance, I'm going to discuss partnerships for divestment of fossil fuels and climate action, as related also to my field and research. So we have to stop investing in fossil fuels and invest in a clean transition instead. And these photos show you they're just a sample of a representation of the disasters we're seeing around the world today. We have to make a clean transition, and that means utilizing many of the types of technologies that we already know about quite well. So I'm going to talk about what is the status of fossil fuel divestments, and the rationale is divestment of fossil fuels is needed to address our global climate crisis. We have to reduce capital flow into carbon-intensive energy projects. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the issues around divestment of fossil fuels, then divestment by key public and private institutions, and then the potential high-level approaches and solutions very, very quickly. So first of all, we have to understand that portfolios do not need to be invested in fossil fuels. There are a lot of myths and I'm going to debunk them. There's lots of academic empirical evidence and logic that says we do not need fossil fuel investments as part of our diversified portfolios. Portfolios can do very well without fossil fuels in them. In fact, fossil fuels increase risk. Another misinterpreted concept is fiduciary duty by the financial community. Fiduciary duty is to do your best for your investors, maximize profit has been the way people have viewed it, but that is an interpretation, and fiduciary duty to investors cannot include destroying the Earth's conditions. This will never be in most firms or investors' interests. They have children and grandchildren too. So continuing investments in fossil fuels today is primarily about powerful, entrenched interests telling stories and making more money while aggravating the climate crisis. It's simply too costly for them to change. They want to continue making money as they have in the past. And those of us who want to discuss sustainable finance don't have a definition to work with. There's no common understanding or boundaries for discussion, and this means we have these wide-ranging discussions and end up with meaningless claims about actions and achievements around sustainable finance. For example, the Conference Board of Canada reports that Canada's 5 largest banks are investing $850 billion in sustainable finance, but that could mean anything. It could mean investing in the sustainability of their business, because that would be to them sustainable finance. So what we need is a definition for sustainable finance. And quite frankly, it's not that hard to develop a definition. I'm going to do that today for you. Financial investing is sustainable when it satisfies the UN definition of sustainable development. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And this is well known from Our Common Future, the Brundtland Report. The climate crisis stops future generations from meeting their own needs. Therefore, we must transition away from fossil fuels. The logic is obvious that we must stop further investment in fossil fuels. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is looking at which institutions must divest, particularly based on academic research. So my colleagues have recently published a paper that has literally identified the 10 investors that are most responsible on a global basis for financing our climate instability. And you can see them listed on this slide. Also, there's been Canadian research to look at the fossil power top 50. And on my slide, I've limited the list to the 12 Canadian enablers according to that same report. And you can see that our big 5 banks here in the city of Toronto are big enablers of this. Remembering my earlier comment about the Conference Board of Canada reporting that they're investing in so much sustainable finance, in fact, they are behind, enabling fossil fuels through their investments. So there seems to be a lot of hypocrisy. I think we know this already, though. University endowment funds need to divest of fossil fuels, and there are 10 Canadian universities that have pledged full or partial divestment. Universities in Quebec started the trend, and we saw some universities in British Columbia join, and then some universities in Ontario, as you can see listed on this slide. And this is according to a recent University Affairs article. Locally, we see that the University of Toronto and University of Waterloo, and of course the University of Guelph are leading here in Ontario. So pension funds also need to divest, and Canadian pension funds have lagged many international counterparts. Some of our Canadian pension funds are quietly reducing investments in fossil fuels, and some are investing in clean energy solutions. But as my research has shown, there is a huge problem in the lack of standards and transparency in reporting. So it makes it very hard to make comparisons and know exactly what these pension plans are doing in respect of making investments. And so I wrote an article published in The Conversation, and more recently, Corporate Knights has also looked at this issue. They found that our pension funds are investing $2 trillion in assets overall. And there has been some change, but not a great deal. And for example, the Canadian Pension Plan has recently rejected divestment outright in an article in the Toronto Star. And EcoJustice has reported that the financial industry continues to pour money into the development, extraction, consumption of fossil fuels, and Canadian banks and pension funds are among the worst culprits. And that's 2022. That's what we're facing. So briefly, I'm going to cover some high-level approaches or solutions. I mean, how do we get these powerful few to move forward on divestment? It's obviously difficult when we know that some of our banks and pension funds are UNPRI signatories, but it seems to have had a limited impact based on the evidence that I've shown you. Some of my research has shown that youth may feel a responsibility to address climate issues. Maybe these next generations will make some changes because of education and career opportunities that may incentivize them. UN SDG 17 tells us that cross-sector partnerships could be effective, and I agree. They, through these partnerships with multiple groups, such as for government projects, we may see some of these other actors, if they're involved, change. We need to continue international and peer pressure, as we are doing when we speak about it now. We need a changeover of leadership at our universities, pension funds, banks, and politicians. Unfortunately, the rising costs of climate disasters are motivating investors. It tells us that it's a little bit late in the game, and of course, insurance companies will refuse insurance. These are motivators for change, but unfortunately, we've waited until this has happened, and I hope we won't wait any longer. We also need greater engagement in democracies. We need democratic institutional reforms to increase participation. Thank you very much. These are some additional references. Thank you for your interest and your time.
Thank you, Professor DeLange, for challenging the business as usual rationale of the financial institutions to support fossil fuel related projects, and what sustainable finance is, defining what it is, relating to our common future. Sustainable development definition is also quite interesting for us to see. So this is an example as to how research academia can work closely with the work that we are doing when it comes to financial institutions and local government financing, and also leading to climate action. And so we are concluding this keynote session now, and there will be a brief break. There will be in the sense that we will break into breakout rooms, which means you might want to grab a cup of coffee or something while you go into your room or whatever it is, yeah. And so there is the 3 sessions. That is one session 12 that is co-hosted by the University of Fraser Valley on emerging financial models. Then we have session 13 that is also virtual. It is co-hosted by Metrics on financing sustainable urban development in Europe. And then we have session 14, climate financing and public sector, also virtual. So that is session 12 will be in the boardroom. Others can be in the other rooms.
Excuse me, Christian, sorry to cut you off there. We have one more keynote speaker. His name is Richard Bell, Councillor of City of Glasgow, Scotland.
Wonderful, wonderful, yeah. I mean, because we did not realize that he was available. So may I then, sorry for that oversight. Then may I then request, before we break, Councillor Richard Bell of City of Glasgow to make his remark related to sustainable urban finance as a part of the keynote session. Here you are, Richard Bell.
Thank you very much, and thank you for remembering I was here. So good morning, Toronto. from a beautiful sunny afternoon here in Glasgow, Scotland's largest and most dynamic city, and as you will be aware, the host of COP26, and indeed a city with a deep historic and continuing connections to Canada. I'm delighted to be invited to speak at the 4th Urban Economic Forum and to share my reflections on the work Glasgow is doing and where, as a global community, the journey for just and equitable transition to net zero carbon and climate resilient economies will take us next. The outcome of COP26, the Glasgow Climate Pact, still has to show its mettle, and global leaders will have an opportunity to do just that in little over a month's time when they gather at Sharm el-Sheikh. But one thing the road to Glasgow last November has really nurtured and accelerated is platforms like this, where cities and regions can share, collaborate, and together add shoulder to the wheel in addressing the challenges of climate emergency. One of those challenges, which has increasingly found voice over the past 18 months or so, is the financing of transition. In short, how are we paying for what often amounts to wholesale change to the very systems upon which our cities have operated for over a century? And if climate finance challenges, developing bankable projects, leveraging public sector finance, etc., weren't tricky enough already, the headwinds coming from Europe as a result of the Russia war in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis here in the UK have the potential to derail us. But colleagues, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the drives for these crises have the same root causes of the climate crisis, the dependence on fossil fuels and the associated political and governance issues. It follows then that the solutions are the same, doubling down on renewables and energy efficiency, on new green fuels, and in building resilience to climate change. Fortunately, at the start of this decisive decade, where drastic transformation is needed, there are increasing numbers of bright spots, and one of those are subnational governments developing solutions to short-term crises, while also tackling more deep-rooted challenges of inequality and climate. When it was announced that Glasgow was the host of COP26, we knew we needed ambition and action that mirrored what was needed at the negotiations. The conference was the first crucial test of the ratchet mechanism in Paris Agreement, of nations coming together to increase their ambition. The results speak for themselves. The Glasgow Climate Pact, agreed on the banks of the Clyde here in Glasgow, was simultaneously the most ambitious global approach yet, but still nowhere near enough. In the build-up to COP26, all eyes were on us in Glasgow. We increased our ambition to help ensure that delegates could negotiate in a city which was well on its way to a more equitable, net zero, carbon and climate resilient place. On mitigations, we set out a target and a plan to become net zero carbon by 2030. We developed and launched an ambitious regional collaborative adaptation strategy and action plan to give adaptation an equal footing. And for both, we began the hard yards of putting our finances onto a more robust and strategic footing. The case for climate action is overwhelming. For some investments in mitigation, every £1 will generate up to £37 of benefits from carbon, health, and productivity. And we also know the alternative. Without substantive collective global mitigation and local adaptation, climate change is projected to reduce growth in Glasgow by at least 3% a year, with costs reaching hundreds of millions as by the year 2050. This, though, pales into insignificance to, for instance, Pakistan, where this year's flooding has reached devastation on 33 million people. But it's not either or. We all have to meet these needs, and we all must do it together. Glasgow, like much of the global community, is moving forward with a range of actions to turn this into reality. The Glasgow Green Deal is focused on mobilising the city and the wider region's economic assets, the finance, the capacity and the skills, and our innovation to make that transition a reality. And whilst we're also pioneering and breaking new ground, we do so sharing approaches and learning from other international cities and economies. From the green budgeting of Oslo, the climate-related finance disclosures from Toronto, to the financing of building retrofit in Italy and in Ireland. We are also at the start of the process of optimising our own resources through the use of the green budgeting approaches. These will allow us to track and quantify the City Council's spend on mitigation and adaptation. We're innovating in approaches to raise capital required for the transition and accelerating its deployment. Exploring, for example, the use of land value capture, new lending institutions such as the UK Infrastructure Bank, and piloting the use of community municipal investments to harness the financial power of local people. We have also launched our Green Investment Prospectus to highlight a range of opportunities for investment where the private sector could play a role. I would, of course, be delighted to share with any of you if you wish to get in touch. The organisers of the event will have my contact details to share that green prospectus. And we're working to build our competencies and capabilities. We're training our people with the appropriate skills, knowledge and experience to help close the finance gap. All of these things will have a strong impact in making sure we raise and deploy the capital we need to deliver transformation. But alongside that, we also need a deeper look at how we transform the system. We are, it must be said, still nowhere near the pace and scale of action required. And I believe we all need to think more deeply about the root causes for the barriers to accelerated progress. The governance and ownership of climate finance problem, the cultures and values we have, and the rethinking what are acceptable demands and capital in the context of the climate crisis. The collective endeavour of this deeper innovation, the building on the existing global push for finance solutions, is what will really unlock the new economies of the 21st century. I thank you very much for your time and for the invite to address you today. Thank you and good luck from Glasgow.
Thank you, Richard. Well, and apologies for the oversight earlier. And I'm happy that to hear your points of view, especially pointing out that every £1 spent will reap a benefit of £37, which I think is fascinating indeed. And Urban Economy Forum and the Pavilion participants will be continuing to contact you and in touch with you and learn from the experiences of Glasgow and elsewhere. And we all remember the message of Code Red that came out of Glasgow last year. Thanks again indeed. Now we end the session with a message from Engineer Sohail Abdul Latif, who is the Minister of Public Works and Housing in Syria. The message will be read by Alex. Thank you.
I'd like to express my pleasure at participating at the 4th Urban Economy Forum World Habitat Day. My enthusiasm is due to the great importance of this forum for the improvement and development of urban conditions in our cities. We are always open to developing our policies and strategies, learning about the experiences of others, and sharing our experiences. We know cities are huge magnets for talent and investment, so it's clear that they have become the main engine of growth in the world, generating more than 80% of global GDP, while helping hundreds of millions out of extreme poverty. However, enormous challenges arise from the speed and scale of city expansion, widening income gaps, worsening pollution, and destroyed and worn out infrastructure are all signs that today's cities are striving to keep pace with growing dreams of their residents for a sustainable and prosperous future. With housing that meets the basic needs of the citizen and improves the quality of life is considered a global challenge in light of the increasing urbanization. It is also an important part of the overall economic and social development process and a fundamental pillar of the progress and advancement of countries. The housing problem is one of the most pressing problems facing development programs in Syria and all countries in the world. As the Syrian government is always looking for innovative solutions to improve the reality of current and future cities and work to develop its sectoral and spatial policies in a way that responds to the current changes and advances them economically and socially. In 2019, the National Housing Strategy was launched in Syria. This strategy comes in line with the global and regional requirements, including SDG 2030 strategy. The strategy is also characterized by a great deal of flexibility with regard to practical implementation on the ground in light of implementation experiences and changing circumstances. This strategy came in light of the complex circumstances of the terrorist aggression against Syria, unilateral sanctions, and unjust economic blockade, the latest of which was the global outbreak of the COVID-19 epidemic, which once again reflected the importance of enabling the right to adequate, healthy, and safe housing for all. Syria has ensured to integrate the National Housing Vision with the national sectoral visions, the Syrian Vision 2030, and the urban economic development plans to enhance the interdependence between the housing sector and all related development and service sectors, and to confirm the effectiveness and efficiency of the strategy. This year had a huge effect to adoption of the National Framework of Regional Planning in Syrian Arab Republic, and it has regarded as the step of total planning process in Syria. To complement this effort, the Ministry of Public Works and Housing has been keen to take the necessary measures so that this strategy represents an integrated, unified vision that will guide the housing sector effectively over the next 20 years and clarify the responsibilities of various sectors as well as policy frameworks in a way that addresses current problems and achieves the hopes of Syrians of all categories to obtain appropriate house by working 6 access. Therefore, this strategy is one of the most important documents affecting integrated development, given the pivotal role that the housing sector plays in bringing about sustainable urban development, as it is closely related to development and economic inputs related to the management of this sector, especially the government's adaptation of the National Framework for Regional Planning, which is an important step towards establishing sound integrated planning. It enables better living standards and economic development if it is planned and implemented in an integrated and effective manner. It also directs policies, planning, and programming activities for investment management and maintenance activities in the areas of housing and self-improvement. Housing strategies at the national and city levels cannot be separated from land use, infrastructure, and other economic development strategies, and is a broad, participatory, and inclusive process that takes place with a supportive legal and regulatory framework. It must be noted that most important challenges face housing insurance are the financing of housing and its access to those who deserve it through the support of the citizens, not just housing, but both together. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the organizers of the conference and the participants of the conference, and the proposed mainly to support data acquisitions technologies in developing countries, raise the value of official development assistance, and enhance financing for sustainable development to bridge the financing gap by lifting restrictions on financing that have hampered the response of developing countries has caused a reversal of progress in achieving the SDGs. The lack of affordable financing has worsened their economic situation and social prospects and threatens the achievements of the SDGs. The unequal capacity to respond to the COVID-19 crisis has had a devastating impact on the economies and progress of developing countries, as well as the development of follow-up mechanisms and the need for continuous updating of data, in addition to a continuous evaluation to the extent to which policies, mechanisms, and procedures are achieved in solving issues and problems related to the housing sustainable development sector to achieve the desired goals and ways of joint cooperation and finding a common vision and a common approach that links all cities. Thank you for listening. I would like to conclude my statement by thanking for the valuable contributions and wish the forum every success and a prelude of more effective joint work. That was the Ministry of Housing and Public Works from Syria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, at last, we now go over to the virtual sessions, session 12, 13, 14, and 15.